There's always going to be something in our lives that is going to need to be pressed out. And often that pressing out happens in a marriage situation. Welcome to Loving Fearlessly. And I love this next question because I was able to kind of get some imagery, and I'm just really excited unpacking it. They asked me, how do you keep your marriage strong? Now, there's a bazillion different answers for that, but I can just tell you what I've done. First, you rest. You rest. There's sometimes you're in situations, you're like, hey, I don't like this, I don't like that. Sometimes you just got to give it a rest. There's been times in conflict with my husband where he's kind of like ramped up and I'm a little ramped up, and I'm like, you know, this could just keep ramping up, or I can give it a rest. And I will actually just walk over to him and he's kind of looking at me like, what are you going to do? And I will just put my arms around him. Why? Because I'm just going to give it a rest. Sometimes you're saying too much and you just need to rest. You just need to just give each other a little bit of a rest. And when I'm saying not like pull away from each other, but just rest in that relationship. Just let it rest. And I know that might sound strange, but if you've ever been in striving, I think you know what I'm talking about. We just got to give some of the conversations a rest. We got to give some of the arguments a rest. You got to give your marriage a rest. Give it time, just like you need to be strong. You're going to have to rest. You're going to have rest. There's a rhythm with rest. And then the next thing, you got to feed and nourish it. You got to feed and nourish it. And you got to feed and nourish your marriage what's healthy. You don't want to feed it what's unhealthy. You don't want to feed it comparison. You don't want to watch shows that, oh, if we watch this show, then we're sexually attracted to each other afterwards. That's called soft porn, or maybe worse. You don't want to put the bad things in and expect a long-term good result. You might have a short-term response that you like, but you're not going to have a long-term response that you're going to like. So you feed, you nourish it. We talked about different ways to do that. Make sure you spend time together. Make sure you have conversation, constantly being open to growing. I know as a woman, I often didn't understand how to feed and nurture my husband. So I talked about not only just speaking words of affirmation, but affection, physical touch, and understanding he heard love differently than me was super important. Then you also have to exercise your marriage. You have to do things that actually help your marriage gain strength. You go through a hard season, instead of just saying, that was horrible, that was hard, actually redeem it. Go back and say, you know, I really hated that season of conflict, but I'm looking at how much closer we are now. That thing that was hard, that obstacle, that financial challenge, that parenting challenge, that marital challenge, I feel so much closer to afterwards. Exercise it. Understand that having done all to stand, you stand therefore. You gain strength when you refuse to compromise, that you have a dream for your marriage and that you're going to grow your marriage when it comes to strength. If you do not intentionally build muscles, they atrophy. I remember being horrified. When I was 40, somebody took a measurement on my body and they said, you have the perfect muscle and fat percentage for a woman of your age. And I was like, yes, I have the perfect muscle versus fat ratio. I just need to stay the same weight. I stayed the same weight. But a number of years later, they measured my fat ratio a decade later, and it had almost doubled. Why? I hadn't gained any weight. I also hadn't gained any strength. And there's a lot of marriages. You have not gained any weight. You look exactly the same. You have not gained any strength. You need to say, what can we do? That would look like what we're doing right now. That's one way of exercising your marriage. Another way of exercising your marriage is go to counseling when you don't have a problem. Get the tools that you need to build relational strength in your marriage. Go out with elder couples. There are so many older couples that have been married for 40, 50 years that if we don't sit down and talk to them, we're going to lose all of the hard-earned insights that they could share with us. So that would be a way of exercising and building strength in your marriage. No comparison. Comparison compromises your strength, doesn't build your strength. Now, what you can do is you could sit down and say, where do we want to be? Where do we want to be? What do we need to prune? What do we need to prop up? What do we need to feed more? What do we need to feed less? So the same way you would build your body is kind of the same way you would take care of a garden. You would need to water a garden. You would need to tend a garden, which means you have to create some kind of order for things to grow in. You'd have to weed a garden so that the nurturing and the nutrients that you're putting in aren't being taken by other people. So what you're pouring into your husband is not being taken by another woman, or it's not being taken, but it's actually going where you want it to go. You're gonna have to weed something like, baby, I want more time with you. That girl that you like at work that's nice, no. You're not going out with her anymore at lunch. I need your emotional connection. So you just kind of weed certain things that are going to be detractors, which are going to be detriments. Maybe you have something in your own life. Maybe you're just kind of checking back in on Facebook with one of those ex-boyfriends. You need to weed that out of your life. Your husband deserves your full heart, your full attention. Don't just kind of have that thing in the background that maybe if this doesn't work out, I've always got this, or maybe my husband isn't giving me enough affirmation, I'm going to get it out here. No, you need to weed that, and you need to have a conversation with your husband so that you guys can build a stronger marriage and not be vulnerable. So when I was thinking about this whole idea of gardening and stuff, I thought immediately about how God compares a man to a tree and a woman to a vine. It's interesting. It says that the wife would be like a fruitful vine, and it says he will be like a tree planted. And I started to think, I want to know the differences between trees and vines, and I want to see how trees and vines interact with one another. And I think this is actually pretty interesting. Psalm 128:3 says, your wife will be a fruitful vine within your house. Your children will be like olive shoots around the table. And then, of course, Psalm 103, just in case you guys were worried I wasn't scriptural, it says he will be like a tree. So vines can grow on trees. Vines can grow on trees, but trees cannot grow on vines. Vines do not have the strength, but they have the flexibility that a tree does not have. Trees can support the weight of a vine. There are two kinds of vines. There are creepers and there are climbers. I think you know what you want to be already. You do not want to be a creepy vine. You want to be a climbing vine. And it's interesting because God compares himself. I am the vine, you are the branches. So this kind of gives us a little bit of an idea of what a leader does. A leader creates a structure for his wife to flourish. That's what leaders do. It isn't about controlling. It's about, I'm going to create. So I love grapes. Right now, I got a mess of my grapevines because I let them grow up and I didn't give them any structure. So if I want to be effective with planting grapes, what I'm going to need to do is give them trellises. I want you to see that a leader would take the vine and say, I need to make sure I'm great, I'm rooted, I'm the vine, but I got to make sure my branches have a trellis. They have something they can grow on, because if they can grow on this, then they're going to have full fruitfulness. Leaders give structures. They are the prop up. They are the arms out. They are the trellis. So a husband is given to the wife so that she has what is on her become fruitful. So we want to talk about that. We're going to make sure the tree is fruitful and the vine is fruitful. Let's say the men are like olive trees. There's a fruit of the olive tree. There's an oil from the olive tree that comes through pressing. And then there is the fruit from the grape. And there is the juice and the wine that comes from grape, again, from pressing. So there's always going to be something in our lives that is going to need to be pressed out. And often that pressing out happens in a marriage situation. So if you're in a situation where your husband is not knowing how to prop you up, let's talk about that, because it's a lot of pressure on a man to feel like, I got to lead in everything. I've got to lead in everything. And say, baby, I don't need you to tell me what to do. I just need you to give me the structure to do in it. And he's like, do it. And explain that difference, and I think he's going to see it. Another thing, how, and again, these two go together. How can I manage in my life when I feel calling And so this wife feels called to the ministry, but her husband doesn't. And she said, but he's the leader. Well, again, if you feel called to the ministry, your husband's job as the leader is to give you structure for you to fulfill that calling. So going back to the purpose of a marriage and leadership is to be examples. These are to cause things to grow. Marriage is supposed to be a power union, not a power struggle. If your husband doesn't feel called into the ministry and you do, let's just sit down and say, what is that going to look like? It doesn't mean you force him to be in the ministry. It doesn't mean he stops you from being in the ministry. No true leader is going to ever say, I don't want you to obey God. That's not what leaders do. But they would say, let's talk about what that looks like. Because right now we have young kids. They have young kids. Is this something that you develop in this season and then do in the next season? What would that look like in our marriage? One of the most powerful women of God I know is Lisa Turkhurst. She has her entire organization, Proverbs 31. She writes books. She ministers. Her husband, he owns a business. He is completely separate from what she does. But what he has done is create a structure and said, you do this. I love what you're doing. Bless it, go and do it. So why do we have leaders? And again, I feel like if you can change this, leaders prop up the dreams of other people by giving them support structures. But just as life is a collection of seasons, you're going to have to know what your season is. And if your leader says, I don't believe this is what we're supposed to do in this season, then you need to talk about that as a couple and decide what that looks like. So there is a problem when the husband is an accountant and a woman doctor? No, not at all. So there shouldn't be a problem if the wife is a minister and the husband is an attorney. Why would that be a problem? Same thing. Husband's going to love his wife. What does it say? As Jesus loves the church. What does Jesus do? He says he washes us with the water of the word. He says he believes the best in it. It says he evokes our beauty, that he loves us in such a way that the God thing in our life can come out. So there shouldn't be any competition. I'm a minister and my husband is a owns a construction company. My husband's a construction worker. It doesn't matter. You're going to love each other. You're going to love and respect your husband. And if he loves you and doesn't take the pressure to control you like Christ loves the church, you should not have a problem. But I will say, Paul was very clear that when we get married, we don't get to make decisions in isolation. We need to make them together. So I believe that you can have a conversation and you don't need to be afraid. You can say, this is what I'm looking for from you. And he's probably going to ask you some questions and you can decide what that looks like.